I never expected the summer to change anything. Not really. I figured it would pass the same way it always did. Slow afternoons, the hum of cicadas, and my dad barking orders from the garage while I helped him with whatever project he'd dragged me into. But this summer felt different from the start. It wasn't just the heat pressing into my skin. It was the way I found myself glancing across the fence more often, waiting for him to appear. Our neighbor's son, Ayan, had been around for years, but it wasn't until this summer that he started to feel inescapable. Maybe it was because he'd just come back from college, a little taller, leaner, more confident. Or maybe it was because my dad couldn't stand him, or his family, and I had to pretend I felt the same. I didn't. Ayan and I weren't close, not exactly. We had a weird history that mostly involved us pretending not to know each other in public, despite having shared birthday parties when we were kids, and late-night gaming sessions back when we used to sneak online. But those days faded as our parents grew colder to one another. Now, even a nod across the yard was risky business. Dad claimed Ayan's father was arrogant and full of himself. The truth was probably more complicated, but when Dad found something or someone he didn't like, that was it. End of story. No exceptions, except me. Because Ayan had been spending a lot of time outside lately, working on something in his backyard, a deck maybe, or a shed, I wasn't sure. I pretended not to notice at first, but then I caught myself watching. Not staring, just looking too long. His shirt would ride up slightly as he reached overhead, and I'd feel this weird rush in my chest, like I'd been caught doing something I shouldn't, even if no one else was around. And then, a few days ago, he waved, not a casual wave. It was direct, intentional, like he knew I was watching. I didn't wave back. I wish I had. Now we were both signed up to volunteer at the community cleanup day. Some overambitious councilwoman had roped our families in, probably thinking it would mend bridges or something. My dad refused naturally, but my mom insisted I go to represent the family. Be polite, help out, and don't cause any trouble, she said while handing me a reusable water bottle and a worn cap. I nodded, slipping my headphones around my neck and trying not to look too eager, because I knew Ayan would be there. I'd seen his name on the sign-up sheet taped outside the community center. The cleanup site was an overgrown trail on the edge of town, one of those forgotten places with broken benches and faded signs. When I arrived, the morning air was warm and sticky, and most of the volunteers were already scattered along the path. I spotted Ayan near the edge of the woods pulling weeds like it was personal. My heart jumped. It was stupid, but it happened. He looked up, and this time I waved. First he smiled, God, that smile. It was like the first crack of sun after days of clouds, unexpected and too much at once. "You're late," he called out, smirking as I walked over. "Fashionably," I replied, trying to sound cooler than I felt. We ended up paired together to clear out some fallen branches and repaint the trail signs. Nothing dramatic, just enough time in shared silence and sideways glances to remind me how much I hadn't forgotten about him. When our hands brushed, reaching for the same can of paint, I flinched, not because I didn't like it, but because I did. Too much. Noticed. "Still jumpy," he teased, eyes glinting. And just like that, something shifted. The summer wasn't going to be normal. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. Something was coming. Something that would change everything. Especially between me and Ayan. When we were kids, Ayan and I used to play hide-and-seek between the hedges that separated our yards. Back then, our parents still spoke to each other. There were neighborhood barbecues, birthday balloons tied to mailboxes, and late summer evenings that smelled like burnt marshmallows and citronella. We were inseparable, partners in crime as our moms called us. But sometime around middle school, everything shifted. His dad made a snide remark about my father's landscaping business. My father retaliated with something worse, and the tension spread like cracks in a windshield. Suddenly, we weren't allowed in each other's houses. We weren't supposed to mingle, and just like that, our names disappeared from each other's friend lists, even though the urge to talk never really left. But that old connection had a stubborn way of resurfacing. During the trail cleanup, We naturally fell into rhythm, like we had never stopped being a team. I held the ladder while he repainted the signs, and he tossed me tools without needing to ask what I needed. Our banter picked up quickly, too. "You missed a spot," I teased, pointing at a tiny smear of white paint on his ear. "That's called artistic flair," he said, wiping his face with the back of his wrist, only smudging it more. "No, that's called amateur hour." He looked down at me, grinning, and for a second I forgot what I was supposed to be doing. There was something about the way he looked at me, like he was letting me see a part of him he kept hidden from everyone else. I felt it settle in my chest, warm and terrifying. We took a short break on a bench, both of us sipping warm water from our half-empty bottles. The sun was brutal and his hair stuck to his forehead in damp waves. "You remember the summer we built that tree fort?" he asked suddenly. I chuckled. "You mean the one that collapsed because you insisted duct tape could hold up the roof?" He laughed, tilting his head back. "Hey, it held for like a full 2 hours. Just long enough for me to get stuck inside while you ran for help." He nudged my shoulder with his. "And I did come back for you. With a cookie, too." I looked at him, smile fading just a bit. "Yeah, you always did come back." The silence after that wasn't awkward, just full, like there was something unspoken hanging between us, and neither of us was ready to name it. Later that afternoon, the community organizer asked for a few volunteers to stay overnight and keep watch over the supplies until the second workday started in the morning. I expected Ayan to say no. I even half expected myself to come up with an excuse. But we both raised our hands at the same time, which is how we ended up alone in the forest with nothing but 2 sleeping bags, a small tent, and a stack of mismatched trail markers. The tent was smaller than expected. Not uncomfortable, just tight enough that we had to be careful not to bump into each other too much. That plan failed within the first 15 minutes. "Pretty sure this wasn't made for 2 guys our size," Ayan muttered as he tried to zip. The side closed while I adjusted the sleeping bags. "Well, it was either this or sharing the back seat of your dad's old truck," I replied. "And I'm not cuddling you in a pickup. Good to know you have standards," he said with a grin, then looked over his shoulder. "But if you had to pick, go to sleep, Ayan." He laughed quietly, then fell onto his sleeping bag with a satisfied sigh. As the night wore on, our joking gave way to silence. The kind of silence that buzzes with thoughts too big to say out loud. I kept my eyes on the ceiling of the tent, watching shadows flicker from the lantern outside. Every so often I'd feel the slightest shift of movement beside me. His leg, brushing mine, his hand adjusting the blanket and grazing my arm. I didn't move away. "Hey," he said after a while, voice low and close. "You ever think about what it would be like if things were different? With our families, I mean." My throat felt tight. "Sometimes. You think we'd still be friends?" "Yeah, I do." He didn't respond right away. Just breathed out slowly, his exhale barely audible. There was a pause. Then quietly, "I missed you." The words hit harder than they should have. Not because they surprised me, but because I'd been carrying that same feeling for years, never daring to say it out loud. I turned my head, trying to see him in the dark. "I missed you too." He shifted slightly and our arms touched, skin against skin, warm and unintentional. But neither of us pulled back. I couldn't sleep after that. Not because I was uncomfortable, but because every part of me was suddenly aware of how close he was. I could hear the soft rhythm of his breathing, feel the subtle rise and fall of the air between us. It wasn't just nostalgia anymore. It wasn't even just friendship. Something else was growing between us. Quietly, steadily, like a slow-burning fire we hadn't noticed until we were sitting right next to it, already warm. And I didn't want to move away. The next morning, the air was still and warm, and the forest felt unnaturally quiet. I woke before Ayan, lying on my side, staring at the curve of his back through the thin fabric of his shirt. His shoulder rose and fell slowly with every breath. I could hear birds chirping outside, but all I focused on was the way his hand had ended up halfway across the space between us, his fingers just a few inches from mine. I stayed like that, unmoving, listening to the stillness between us. Part of me wanted to reach out, to see if touching his hand would change anything. The other part, louder, more nervous, reminded me that if I did, everything could go wrong. We were supposed to pack up by 9 a.m., but as luck would have it, the coordinator's truck broke down on the other side of town, stranding us with no way back until evening. Ian shrugged it off like it was nothing. "Extra day in the woods," he said with a grin. "Could be worse." I wasn't sure I agreed. Not because I didn't want to stay, but because I wasn't sure how much longer I could be around him without slipping. We spent the first few hours cleaning up the trailhead, organizing supplies, and talking about everything but the closeness between us. We danced around it, laughing too easily, trading sarcastic jabs, letting the air between us simmer without touching it. It wasn't until early afternoon that the sun got to us. The heat settled thick over everything, and we found ourselves taking refuge inside the tent again, drinking from our water bottles and wiping sweat off our necks. Ian pulled off his shirt with a tired groan. "God, I forgot how gross summer gets out here." I nodded, looking anywhere but at his chest. He leaned back against the side of the tent, wiping his forehead with a small towel, then tossed it over to me. "You look like you're about to melt." I caught it, laughing softly. "I feel like I already have." Our legs were touching again, but this time neither of us shifted away. The tent felt even smaller in the heat. I could feel his breath on my shoulder, and every time he moved, the sound of skin against fabric sent a pulse of awareness through me. He turned to look at me, his eyes softer than usual. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure," I said, though I wasn't sure I meant it. "Why did you stop talking to me? Back in high school?" My throat tightened. I looked down at my hands, picking at the corner of my thumbnail. "Because it was easier. For everyone." "Was it easier for you?" I didn't answer right away. "I missed you," he added, quieter now. "Even back then. I kept waiting for you to say something, and when you didn't, I figured maybe you really didn't care anymore." I looked up at him slowly. His expression wasn't accusing, it was honest, raw in a way I hadn't seen from him in years. "I cared," I said. "Too much, maybe. That's why I didn't say anything." His brow furrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" I hesitated. Everything inside me screamed to hold back, to let the moment pass, but he was so close, and the heat made everything feel hazy and real at the same time. "I was scared," I admitted, barely above a whisper. "I didn't know what I felt, or what you felt, or if any of it even meant anything. And with our families the way they were, I guess I thought it would be better to pretend it wasn't there." He was quiet for a long time. Then he exhaled and leaned his head back, eyes closed. "I always wondered," he murmured, "if it was just me." His hand shifted slightly on the floor of the tent and our pinkies touched. Barely. But it was enough. I stared at the point of contact. My breath stuck somewhere in my chest. He didn't move his hand. Neither did I. A breeze rustled the tent, flap. Dust floated in, the golden light spilling in from the outside. Everything around us felt like it was holding its breath. "I thought I was imagining things," he said, still not looking at me. "The way you'd look at me sometimes. The way you'd laugh when we were alone, but barely say a word when other people were around." "I wasn't imagining it," I said, but I didn't know what to do with it. He finally turned to me, eyes searching. "And now?" I didn't have an answer. Not one I was brave enough to say, so I just looked at him, really looked, and hoped he'd see it in my face. He smiled faintly, like he did. Then he leaned his head against mine. Just for a moment. A soft, careful touch. Not a kiss. Not anything dramatic. Just closeness. I closed my eyes. Every part of me wanted more. To lean in further. To close the distance, to finally say all the things I'd been holding in for years. But I didn't. Because I was still scared. Scared that if I reached out, he might pull away. Scared that whatever this was might crumble under the weight of the real world waiting for us back home. But his shoulder pressed lightly against mine, and that small, steady pressure said more than words could. We sat like that for what felt like hours. Not speaking, just breathing together in the heat and the quiet. Outside, the world kept turning. But in that tent, it felt like time had stopped. Just long enough for both of us to admit without saying it that something was happening and neither of us wanted it to end. That night the sky was a deep violet, the stars sharp and cold overhead. We hadn't spoken much since the moment in the tent, not because there was nothing to say. If anything, there was too much, but the silence between us had changed. It wasn't awkward anymore. It felt charged, full of things unspoken but acknowledged. We sat by the small campfire, the last one we'd light before heading back home tomorrow. Ian leaned back against a log, sipping slowly from a mug of hot cocoa, the fire casting flickers of orange light across his face. His expression was thoughtful, distant, but peaceful in a way I rarely saw. I kept sneaking glances at him between sips of my own drink, memorizing the way the light curled into his hair, the shape of his profile, the small curve of his lips when he wasn't talking. I knew I shouldn't stare, but I couldn't help it. Not anymore. He noticed eventually. I could feel it in the way his eyes shifted toward me, how his posture changed ever so slightly. "What?" he asked, smiling softly. I shook my head, but I didn't look away. "Nothing. Liar," he said gently. "You've been doing that all day. Looking at me like you want to say something." His voice wasn't accusing. It was calm, maybe even inviting. But it made my heart lurch all the same. "I guess I do," I said after a long pause. He turned toward me fully, setting his mug down in the dirt. The fire popped quietly beside us. "Then say it," he whispered. I opened my mouth, closed it, rubbed my palms on my jeans and tried again. "It's not easy." "I'm not asking you to make it easy," he said. "I just want the truth." The fire crackled between us. A breeze drifted through the trees carrying the scent of pine and ash and something familiar, something that reminded me of all the summers we used to spend together before everything got complicated. "I used to think I was just being stupid," I began. "Back in school when I'd get nervous every time you sat next to me, when I'd find excuses to call you even when I didn't have anything to say, when I'd get this weird ache in my chest if I saw you talking to someone else." Ian was watching me, but he didn't interrupt. He just listened, his gaze unwavering. I tried to convince myself it was just friendship, that I was being dramatic, but it never went away. Even when we stopped talking, even when my dad kept going on about how your family was trouble, even when I told myself to let it go, it was still there. You were still there. I took a shaky breath and looked at him, forcing myself not to look away. And being here again, just the two of us, it's brought everything back. Or maybe it never really left. Ian didn't move. His hands were clasped in front of him, fingers tightening around each other. "I'm scared," I admitted, "because if I'm wrong, if I've read everything wrong, I don't want to ruin this. I don't want to lose you all over again." He looked down, just for a second. When he looked back up, his eyes were glassy in the firelight. "You're not wrong," he said. My chest clenched. "I kept hoping you'd say something," he continued. "All these years I thought maybe I was crazy. I thought maybe you didn't feel anything, but when I'd see you at the store with your dad or hear your name from someone else, it was like this little sting inside me, like something unfinished. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until it came out in a rush." He smiled at that. "I tried to move on," he added. "I dated people. I made friends. But it was never the same. It was never you." His voice broke a little on the last word, and I felt something deep inside me crack open. "I didn't know if saying it would make things worse," he said. "But if you hadn't said something tonight, I think I might have exploded." We both laughed, quietly, shakily. But it was real. It cut through the tension just enough to breathe again. "Why now?" I asked. "After everything?" He tilted his head. "Maybe because it's the first time we've actually had space to be honest, no parents, no old expectations, just us." His words were simple, but they settled into me like gravity. I shifted closer, unsure if I was dreaming this or if it was really happening. His gaze flicked down to my mouth, and for a second, neither of us breathed. "Can I?" I started, then stopped, heart racing. "You can," he said, barely above a whisper. That was all I needed. I leaned in slowly, afraid the moment would vanish if I moved too fast. My hand brushed his cheek, tentative at first, then firmer as he leaned into the touch. Our foreheads met gently, and I felt the warmth of his breath mingling with mine. When our lips touched, it wasn't like fireworks or music swelling in the background. It was quiet, tender, careful. It was everything. His hand came up to my chest, fingers curling into my shirt like he needed to hold on to something solid. I kissed him again, a little deeper this time, and he sighed into it like he'd been waiting forever. We pulled apart slowly, eyes still locked. He chuckled softly, a little dazed. I wasn't sure what that would feel like. "And?" I asked, breathless. "It feels like something I don't want to lose again." I reached for his hand, threading our fingers together. He squeezed back. The fire crackled beside us, throwing shadows across our faces, but I didn't feel cold anymore. Not even a little. I felt like I'd finally stepped into the truth I'd been afraid of for years. And instead of falling apart, everything had clicked into place. We sat there for a long time, fingers laced, sides pressed close, our cheeks still, flushed from the kiss. Neither of us said anything more for a while. We didn't need to. The silence now wasn't tense. It was full of understanding, of something new, something real, beginning. "Let me know when you're ready for the next part." We stayed by the fire until the last ember faded, and even then, neither of us wanted to move. There was something about that moment, stillness wrapped in warmth and quiet understanding, that made me want to pause time. Ayan leaned his head against my shoulder, and I let mine rest on his. The closeness didn't feel strange anymore. It felt overdue. "You know," he murmured, his voice a little sleepy, "you were terrible at hiding it." I looked down at him, pretending to be scandalized. "Excuse me?" He smirked, not lifting his head. "You think I didn't notice the way you'd go all quiet when I got too close? Or how you always found some excuse to accidentally touch my hand?" "Those were genuine accidents," I said, completely unconvincing. "Right," he said, laughing softly. I felt his laughter through my arm, and it made something flutter inside me, light, warm, completely unguarded. I'd never heard him laugh like that around anyone else. Or maybe I'd just never noticed it the way I did now. I was trying so hard not to ruin anything, I admitted. He shifted, lifting his head just enough to look at me. "You didn't ruin anything, you just took your time." "Was that your polite way of calling me emotionally constipated?" I asked. "I'd never say that," he replied, straight-faced. "But yes." I nudged him gently, and he nudged me back, our shoulders bumping in a rhythm that was both teasing and tender. Something about us had shifted, not drastically, but noticeably. We were the same, and yet not. The tension that used to hang so heavily between us had softened. There was no more guessing, no more pretending. Just this. Being with each other, fully seen. Eventually we wandered back into the tent, but we didn't bother crawling into separate sleeping bags this time. He reached for mine and opened it wide, and without a word I slid in beside him. Our bodies fit naturally against each other, like we'd been doing this for years. His arm draped over my waist, and I turned slightly, just enough to see his face. In the dim light spilling through the tent's mesh window, he looked peaceful, his eyes half-lidded, his expression soft in a way I'd rarely seen. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and realize I imagined that kiss," I whispered. "You didn't," he whispered back. Then, a pause. "But if," You need convincing again. I laughed under my breath. Tempting. He smiled but didn't press. We both seemed to understand that tonight wasn't about rushing anything. It was about feeling everything. Letting it settle in. I was scared, I said after a long moment. I know. Not just about you. About what comes next. His hand, warm and steady, moved gently over my back. Your dad? Yeah, I admitted. He wouldn't get it, and he definitely wouldn't accept it if he knew it was you. Ayan didn't say anything right away. Then softly, we'll figure it out. Even if that means keeping this quiet for a while. I don't need the world to know, he said. Just you. That hit me harder than I expected. I blinked a few times, staring at the curve of his jaw. You really mean that? He nodded. I've gone so long pretending I didn't feel anything. I can wait a little longer to tell other people. As long as I don't have to pretend around you anymore. I didn't have words for that, not right away. So instead I leaned in and kissed his forehead, lingering there for a beat. We'll take it slow, I said finally. Figure it out one step at a time. Ayan smiled again, his eyes closing. Just don't ghost me this time, okay? Never, I whispered. He shifted closer, his leg tangling with mine, and just like that we settled into the quiet. Our fingers found each other under the covers, and I held on to his like an anchor, like proof that this was real. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether my dad would find out, whether the world outside our little bubble would make things harder. But in that moment, none of it mattered. I had Ayan next to me, his breath steady and slow, his warmth seeping into every corner of the space between us. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what I felt. I was finally letting myself feel it, completely, openly. And that was enough. The morning sun spilled golden light over the tent, warming my face and gently coaxing me awake. I blinked a few times, still wrapped in the drowsy haze of sleep. Ayan was already awake, lying on his side, watching me with a sleepy kind of softness in his eyes. His hair was a mess, sticking out in every direction, and I'd never seen anything more perfect. You drool when you sleep, he said, smiling. Don't start, I muttered, groaning and burying my face in the pillow. You're not allowed to be smug before breakfast. I'm not smug, he replied, stretching. I'm just observant. We both laughed, and the ease between us felt like it had always been there, like something that had finally clicked into place after years of turning the wrong pieces. Packing up was slower than usual. Neither of us said it out loud, but we were stalling. The idea of going back, of returning to the routine where this thing between us had to stay hidden, where every glance had to be careful, sat heavy in my chest. Still, we moved around the campsite in sync, folding tarps, shaking out sleeping bags, brushing off our shoes. Every so often our fingers would brush and one of us would smile just a little too long. When we finally loaded the last of the gear into the trunk of the car, I stood there for a moment, hands on my hips, looking out over the trees. The sunlight danced through the leaves, casting a warm glow over everything, like nature itself was giving us a nod. Ayan came to stand beside me. I'm going to miss this, he said. The quiet? The quiet, he nodded. And the way you look. When you're not trying to act like everything's fine. I turned to him, surprised by the gentleness in his voice. You let your guard down out here, he added. It suits you. I swallowed hard. I wish I could be like that all the time. You can, he said simply. At least with me. You can. There it was again, that quiet certainty he carried. It made me want to believe that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't something fragile. That it didn't have to break the moment we went back. As if reading my thoughts, he reached into his pocket and pulled something out, a thin leather bracelet, a bit worn, with a tiny carved charm hanging from it. It was shaped like a leaf, simple and smooth. I made it in woodshop years ago, he said, sheepish. I was gonna throw it out, but I don't know. Thought maybe you should have it. I took it from him slowly, my fingers brushing his. Why? Because, he said, looking at me like it should have been obvious, now you'll always have a piece of this place, of us. I held the bracelet in my palm for a moment, running my thumb over the leaf. Then without a word, I tied it around my wrist. Ayan smiled, satisfied. Looks better on you anyway. You're just saying that so I don't cry, I said, voice rough around the edges. Maybe, he said, leaning in, his forehead brushing mine. But it's still true. We stayed like that for a moment, heads pressed together. The world hushed around us, then he pulled back, his hand finding mine and lacing our fingers together. He didn't let go. Whatever happens when we get back, he said, we don't lose this. Deal? Deal, I whispered. The drive home was quiet, but not the uncomfortable kind. It was the kind filled with silent promises, the radio low in the background, his hand occasionally brushing against mine between gear shifts. As we pulled onto my street, the air grew heavier. My dad's car was in the driveway, a reminder that the rest of the world still existed and that it wasn't always kind. Ayan parked but didn't turn off the engine right away. I looked at him. He looked at me. We'll figure it out, I said, more to myself than anything. We will, he agreed. One step at a time. I nodded, taking a deep breath before reaching for the door. But before I got out, I looked down at the bracelet on my wrist and smiled. I turned back to him. I'll call you later? You better, he said, grinning, or I'm showing up with that terrible lasagna you hate. You wouldn't. Watch me. We both laughed again, so easy, so real, and I stepped out. The sound of the door closing behind me surprisingly final. As I walked up the front steps, I didn't feel the same weight I used to. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew there were things to navigate, things to hide for now. But I also knew that something real had begun, and that whatever came next, I wouldn't be facing it alone. Ayan was more than just the boy next door. He was my friend, my spark, my safe place, and now, he was something more. This wasn't the end of our story. It was just the beginning.